A war between humans and monsters. That's a quite well explored theme in fantasy novels, wouldn't you agree? But the book that I'm going to talk about today is more than just a fantasy novel about a fight between humans and monsters. It has a lot of underlying theme of recognizing what it means to be human, what it means to be a monster, and to what lengths you would go to protect your own people. There's also a interesting relationship between two main characters who are at opposite ends but have to join hands together because of circumstances, and those kinds of tensions are something that I love to read about. I am going to be talking about today a book called Beast by Emma Roberson. Hello, I'm back with another book review, and this time it's an interesting fantasy novel. So, I read a lot of fantasy books, and most of the times it grapples with similar themes, and very rarely do you find a book which comes up with something that is unique. The premise is interesting, and it also has the characters that are so driven and so interesting that it hooks you in. Today, I'm going to talk about a book called Beast by Emma Roberson, and that book just makes you wonder about to what extent a person or a monster would go to save its own people. And it has a lot of underlying messaging of what it means to be a man or a monster. And if you look at it from just a story's perspective, you'll get to realize that the author tries to create a very interesting world. The protagonist is a leviathan who used to be a former sea creature and has suddenly turned into a human being. And after becoming a human being, he has to ally with someone who he considers generally as a rival, but that must be done to protect his own people. And you see this entire shift of a person who is kind of like a monster becoming human and having this kind of empathy and this sense of responsibility for its own people. I always like books that have fresh ideas, or at least try to exploring the same trope um with a different point of view or with a different approach. With this book, Beast, what was interesting to me was the fact that it struggles a lot with identity and ideology. Most of the fantasy novels focus so much on the world building that the characters themselves do not appear at the forefront the way they did in this book. And when I was reading this book in the initial chapters, there were a couple of point of views of characters which were so striking and so interesting that I just could not put the book down. When I'm talking about this book, let me give you a little bit of context about the storyline, and then we'll talk about my opinion and what was interesting to me and why I think you should be reading this book. So imagine this. The Leviathan, once a feared sea monster, is forced onto land. He has become human now. He navigates the world of witches, men, and all sorts of monsters. This Leviathan, whose name is Aiden, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He's a former sea creature who is transformed into a human-like being by a mysterious force. So he has to be like a human even though he's not. And that's where the struggle for identity comes in. Also, he has to join forces and join hands with Master of the Vanguard, who's the leader of the Royal Monster Hunters. So imagine I'd say ex-monster who's now human working with a monster hunter. You can understand the dynamics of the relationship and how interesting it would be to read about this. But he has to do it to protect his kingdom. And the threats of other monsters and humans alike are just weighing on him, and he has to make sure to maintain this unusual friendship to ensure that his people are safe. And this kind of relationship is quite looked down upon by everyone who sees it, because of course most people fear anything new, and whether it's the real world or the fantasy world, people generally aren't too progressive when it comes to unusual relationships. The battle scenes of this book are described in such vivid details that you can almost smell the blood and hear the roars. This is me just telling you a little bit about the story that you're going to be reading in Beast. But what struck me most was not the story or the plot itself, even though that was really needed to make sure that you stay engaged in the book, but the characters itself and the underlying themes, which were more about, questioning your own self about, are monsters just misunderstood, or is there a darker side to humanity? The characters are not just like cookie cutter heroes and villains. There's a lot more to it. The interesting part of it though is that struggle between like identity and ideology that the characters are struggling with while there's so much going outside, and every single circumstance and every single obstacle that's put in their way is another test for them to delve deeper into themselves. But there's also a lot of takeaways that you can take after reading this book. For me, it was the relationship between George, I hope I'm pronouncing that right as well, it's Jor, and Aiden, who touch on deep social topics of like how to overcome prejudices and build trust when it's an unusual relationship that everyone's looking down upon. And it's a journey of identity, loyalty, redemption that goes beyond the usual like hero and sidekick trope. The author is who's the creative force behind this magnificent book brings such a unique perspective to the table with beautifully illustrated scenes and characters. This just like elevates your imagination and puts you in a world which is complex but also so interesting to read about. If you're just a like newbie fantasy reader, or if you don't like some heavy topics, even then you can just read this book for its story, which is fun, which is interesting, it's adventurous, it has a lot of good world building, a mix of like mythology and different elements of folklore, science fiction, horror, everything, a bit of everything that would engage the reader to continue reading this book. But if you like your fantasy novels with a little bit more under the surface, even then this will be a good book for you. It just depends on what kind of reader you are, I guess, and how deeply you want to think about the books that you're reading. I know for some genres, I'm the kind of reader I would just like a good storyline, some interesting characters, some fun dialogues to read, and that's enough. But for some novels, I'm the kind of person who would be thinking more deeply about, okay, so this character, what is he trying to reflect? Okay, so this part of the story, is there something significant or something with more depth and something more profound that the author is trying to convey? So if you're like the latter, then The Beast will be quite a memorable book because it puts all these things in perspective in such a way that when you're reading it, you're enjoying it like a story. But when you sit down, close the book, and start reflecting upon it, that's when all these things, come rushing back. Beast is quite a captivating story. So if you're looking for a book that will challenge your expectations, that will hook you in and not let you go until you've finished it, then Beast by Emma Roberson is for you. I will leave the Amazon link of the book below in the description section and you can go buy this book. But if you are also like tired of all the usual trending books on Instagram and some of them are just not hitting right, and you want to read something unconventional, you want to read something which is not trending and not too hyped up, then this is going to be the book for you. Because I do read a lot of indie authors, a lot of authors that people haven't heard about much. And the reason for that is just because I want something fresh, something new, apart from books which are commercial successes because they've been following a single trope, a pattern in which if you put dark romance, enemies to lover, or a great fantasy book with a strong female character, that's going to be an instant hit. Even then, you still need good writing. Even then, I would want to read something new, something interesting, something that I haven't tried before, just to challenge my own taste and see if this is something that I would like. So if you're a reader who wants to explore new things instead of just the trending topics and just the trending books, try this one.